Okay.
Okay, welcome to the Australian Jewish Genealogy Society in brackets Victoria talk on genealogy indexer. And our speaker today, coming to us all the way from the United States, is Logan Kleinwax. He's Jewish Gen's research director for Danzig/Gdansk. He's a former board member of Geshe Galicia and creator of online genealogy research tools. His website, genealogyindexer.org, received the IAJGS 2012 award for outstanding contribution to Jewish genealogy via the internet, print, or electronic product, and was one of Family Tree magazine's 101 best websites for 2015 to 2023. He received Jewish Gen's Susan E. King Volunteer of the Year Award in 2022. During the war in Ukraine, Logan has worked to support Ukraine archives needs and facilitate preservation of Jewish genealogical documents in Lviv. And having said that, I'll pass over to Logan.
Thank you very much, Rodney and Max. And I want to echo Max's statement about Israel and just add also that I think all of us as genealogists uh, can appreciate the value of our work and the meaning, not only to us, but to our families and descendants, even more because of the threats that Israel and Jewish people face. And I've heard from a lot of my Israeli friends and uh, genealogical volunteers that this is important to them, even at times like this and after October 7th. So, uh, on the one hand, while these are very grave events, and we're here having a Zoom chat, it's also important, I think, what in general what we're doing as genealogists. And I've cooperated quite a bit with Israeli genealogy societies, and I look forward to strengthening that in the future, particularly through Genealogy Indexer. So I'm going to share my screen now, and one moment. Okay. So you should be seeing first slide. Can somebody nod?
Yeah.
Okay. So I will take questions at the end. If you have questions, you can enter them into the chat, and I will look back at the end, or you can wait. And also, you're welcome if you have a long, detailed question, or you think of something afterwards, and you want to write to me at logan@genealogyindexer.org. You're welcome to do that. Um, and I will respond eventually, maybe not immediately, but I will respond. So, as Rodney and Mac explained, I'm going to be talking about my website, genealogyindexer.org. And this website is a search engine. And what you search with it, mainly historical directories, also Yitzhak books and other genealogical sources. But most of what we're going to be talking about today are historical directories. So, what do I mean by a directory? This is what a telephone directory used to look like in the US. I have to say I've never seen an Australian telephone directory, so I hope they're similar. You get the idea here. It's very dense, a lot of names. Okay. And anything with a lot of names can be a genealogical resource. Now, you may not think about telephone directories as being a genealogical resource, but if you have an uncommon name like mine, why not see if there's anyone else with that name in the telephone directory? And if so, call them up, send them a letter. And actually, that's what my grandfather used to do. He moved around quite a bit in the States, and wherever he moved, he would look in the phone book for anybody with the same name, and he'd write to them or he'd call them up and say, "Hey, is it possible that we're related?" Very often, they determined exactly how they were related, and sometimes they didn't, but they knew they were from the same part of Galicia, and they kept in touch. And all that correspondence formed the basis of my own research on that part of my family. So that's a strategy that is often overlooked. And it's even easier now because you don't have to rely on thumbing through the directory for your town, right? Everything is online now. We don't have the print books here anymore. And you can just go on a website and search the whole US. And I imagine it's the same in Australia, but I have to say I don't know for sure. But what's so wonderful about that is I don't have to know in advance what town people are in. I don't have to specify a town, so I can search everywhere in the US with my uncommon surname. And that is a reasonable genealogical strategy that most people don't pursue, but something to keep in mind. And of course, uh, in the US and in Australia, we're often researching family that doesn't live in those countries. And that's where international phone books come in and business directories. And they're also online. And if your Google skills aren't great and you can't find, say, the Polish phone books by Googling, you can use these two websites. I'm not affiliated with them in any way. They're a little spammy, maybe, but they're still useful. Infobell.com and wayp.com. These websites can help you to find uh, where are the Polish phone books online or Belgian or Israeli phone books. Okay. So it's pretty easy to find online directories and search them. And maybe you have cousins, other distant relatives. And this is worth doing. But of course, as genealogists, while we're interested in the present and finding living relatives, we're also very interested in the past. And there have been phones for a while, and there have been businesses for a while. So it's not surprising that there are old telephone directories and business directories out there, in archives, in libraries, in people's attics. And some of them are online, some of them are not online, but the point is they exist. And even if we think about residential directories, just list of who lives in a town, in Berlin or in Vienna, or somewhere in Europe, some of those go back to the 18th century. So there's this huge quantity of directories that are very dense with names that could be a great genealogical resource. But how do you actually access them? How would you search them? And that's where my site comes in. So genealogyindexer.org, it's a search engine primarily for historical directories, older directories. The ones that are online, for that are current are, if not kept up to date, are maybe a couple years old at most. So if you want to find directories from 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 150 years ago, that won't work. And that's where my website comes in. Um, we'll look at some of those directories in a moment and a little bit at some of the other sources. So as a search engine, it's a bit like Google in that you can type any text you want, and you're going to get a list of matches to your search. And those matches will include links. Like in Google, you get a link to a website. And on Genealogy Indexer, the link will be to a scan of a page from that directory. So you'll see the original, an image from the 1912 business directory of Warsaw. So you search with text, you get links to view the images. And as you'll see in the search results, you get a little excerpt, a little snippet of text that surrounds the match. So if I search for my name, I can see the context in which it appears before I click the link to actually view the image. So I'll demonstrate that, so you can see exactly what that looks like. Like Google, you can search for any text. So most of the time you'll be searching for a surname, but not always. And you can get creative, and we'll see some examples of other searches. And also like Google, there are advanced ways to search, which may not be obvious. We'll walk through a couple of them, and I'll show you where to learn about the other advanced ways to search. So the scope of directories, the geographic scope, is quite broad. It's mainly Eastern Central Europe, but there's stuff from many other areas. There's even a directory from Australia, uh, covering Australia from, I think, 1888. And maybe I should add more. You guys can let me know if that would be useful. But the focus is on Eastern Central Europe, mostly 1840s to 1940s. But again, the coverage is broader. There's earlier, there's some later. And I used to say when I started talking about Genealogy Indexer, which was many years ago, almost 20 years ago, I used to say that none of this content can be found anywhere else. But by now, the main commercial genealogy websites like Ancestry, they've realized that yes, directories are a valuable resource. So they put many online. So it's no longer true that sort of I'm the only game in town, but it's still the case that most of the content you won't find elsewhere. So if you go on JewishGen or Ancestry or GRI Poland, you won't find this stuff. And even if you do, it may not be as easily searchable, and certainly it's not all searchable in the same place. So Genealogy Indexer brings together a lot of this content that you wouldn't otherwise be searching. It makes it very easy for you to search it. And it is a completely free website. You don't have to make an account. There's no advertising. You just go online and use it. And hopefully it's still early on Sunday. So hopefully later today, if you want to, after this talk, after you've had your breakfast, late breakfast or early lunch, you can go on and in a couple of seconds, you might find something new about your family. So why would you want to search a historical directory? So there are a lot of different reasons. The most basic level, you want to know where somebody lived and when. And when I say where, I don't mean Poland or near Warsaw. I mean the specific town or village, and exactly that they were there in 1910. Were they also there in 1911? Maybe, maybe not. That's very, very important because the survival of records, of birth records, marriage records, censuses, notary records, all that stuff, the survival, whether it's online or in archives, depends very much on the exact place and date. And if you move 5 kilometers away to another village, maybe the records don't survive, or 2 years later, maybe they don't. So you need to know to be effective, especially with offline research, excuse me, to be researching what's in some archive, okay, that's not online. You need to know the exact place and date that you're interested in, and directories can help with that. Also, if you like to travel to the places where your ancestors lived, it's one thing to go to the town, but it's another experience, in my view, to stand in front of the very building or where it once stood, where your ancestors lived. So you can get that street address often from a directory. If you have an uncommon surname, and I think I'm in that category, and Rodney also is in that category, um, why not search all of the historical directories from all of Europe and all these other places for 200 years and just see every time that name is mentioned? And maybe you will discover people you didn't even know they existed. That is very often the case for people who have unusual names, and they find, oh, here's a Kleinwax. I don't know who this person is, or I didn't know any Kleinwaxes who were in this town. What's the story here? And now all of a sudden you have another research director, and maybe that material from that place is not online, and that's why you didn't find it at JewishGen. You know, maybe you have to contact an archive to get that, or maybe it is online, but you just didn't search, you ignored it because that's not the town that you're familiar with or the region. That's a very common experience. If you're researching Holocaust victims, okay, maybe you have a page of testimony, but you don't have anything else. Maybe you have nothing from this person's lifetime. And I always ask people if you're successful in using the site, if you find something, to let me know, right? Normally people only write if they're complaining. But I like to hear about the successes too. And most of the time that people write to me, it's exactly the situation. I have a Holocaust victim I'm researching, and this business directory I found on your site is the first contemporaneous document that I have from this person's life. So this book was published while he was alive, and it shows that he was a pharmacist in this town, and it's proof that he was there. We have a page of testimony that's obviously after the fact, and maybe the birth records for this town don't survive. So this is it. This is a very common occurrence. And there are these other reasons I'm not going to get into in detail, except the last one, that unexpectedly you might find sort of core genealogical information like a birth date or a birthplace or a maiden name in a directory. And when you think about a telephone directory or business directory, that's probably not the kind of information you're imagining, but you can find that sometimes if you're lucky. And I'll show some examples of that. So the scope is quite broad, the geographic scope. For all of these countries, there are countrywide directories covering the whole country. And also for many multinational regions like all of Austria-Hungary. There are directories that cover all of Austria-Hungary, and they're huge, as you might imagine, thousands of pages. So if you're interested in any place that was once in Austria-Hungary, or the Ottoman Empire, or the Russian Empire, it's covered in some directories. And there's also geographic coverage of historical regions that do not map exactly to countries today, like Galicia. Okay, part of Galicia today is in Poland, parts in Ukraine. So it's not a Polish directory, it's not a Ukrainian directory, it's a directory of Galicia. So you have to, as you start to use these directories, you have to think about if this is a directory from 1912, what was the geography in 1912? What were the political entities that existed at that time? They may be different than today. Some directories have a very narrow scope of a single city, okay? And those tend to be much more comprehensive. This is true for many, many directories, many cities, excuse me, in Germany and in Poland. Too many for me to list here. They're on the website. They're also in the handout, in the PDF that I will send after the talk. So if you're interested in Germany and Poland, you're probably in luck. There is probably going to be a city-specific directory that will be very comprehensive. And outside of Germany and Poland, if any of these other cities are relevant to you, then there are multiple city-specific directories for them, which can be uh, quite important. Actually, before I discuss this slide, let me go back quickly. Uh, is anyone researching a place that is not covered by these regions, somewhere else? If you are, could you put it in the chat right now? I'd like to know where I should be improving coverage. And so if you're interested in a place that's not covered, I'm not seeing anything. Okay, well, if you think of it later, put it in the chat. Okay, so right now, there are more than 3,500 directories on the site, 2 million pages. And that number is kind of hard to wrap your head around. What does 2 million telephone business address directories look like? You think back to that first slide I showed of that very dense telephone directory with a couple hundred names on one page. You can imagine there's a lot of people in these directories. 2 million pages. I think conservatively, it's 100 million names. So this is a huge amount of material. And I think people who have not searched it are usually pleasantly surprised and they find information. And besides the directories, there are 364 Yisker books that are searchable on the site. And we'll look at that. I'll demonstrate searching. And Polish and Russian military sources, community histories, and some lists of students from Polish secondary schools. So those are all important, but just in terms of number of pages, number of names, that's a much smaller part of the site. Most of the site is the historical directories. Okay, so I'm now going to switch to the website. And actually, let me enlarge this a little bit, a little easier for you to see. And I'm just going to point out a few key features. So first of all, you can see a search box right at the top. And if you remember nothing else about this presentation, just go to genealogyindexer.org, type your surname in the search box and press search. And that is the simplest way to search, and you'll find something. We're going to demonstrate that, and we'll use some more. We'll go into some details about other ways to search. But as a first step, that's something you could do. You can see below the search box that there are some drop-down menus with different options for ways you can control the search. And we'll go through these. So you can do a simple search, leave everything at the default options, or you can do a more advanced search. So we'll see when that might be useful. There's a summary of the content as it is. What I want to highlight for you is up at the top, there's this menu that says collections. So we'll look at the directories link. And on this page, you can see a list of all 3,500 plus directories that are included when you search. You don't need to look at this list. You can just type your surname and press search and search. But if for some reason you want to see exactly what is included, it's all on this page, and each of these titles of a directory is a link that will take you to some digital library somewhere that is actually hosting the images. So if you wanted to browse it rather than searching, you could do it that way. If you wanted to download the whole book to your computer, you could do it. And this list is arranged geographically. It's now way too long for me to go through and talk about in detail. I used to call out interesting directories and describe them because uh, these things were put together uh, not according to some standard. There are a lot of quirks and idiosyncrasies of the directories and a lot of different types of directories beyond the basic sort of telephone address and business. So it's helpful to know in more detail, but we just don't have time. So I'm going to point out maybe the most important feature, which regards the geographic scope. So let's say, as an example, that you're researching Croatia. So you see, oh, I can jump to the Croatia section and see what is included. So I clicked on Croatia, and okay, we have some directories from Croatia. Um, and you might think this is all that's on the site from Croatia, but that's not true. Because at the top, you can see that there are directories covering all of Austria-Hungary, and it says multinational Austria-Hungary plus. So even some other places that weren't technically in Austria-Hungary were included. And for example, in 1862, you can see there's a directory, and the scope of this directory is Hungary, Transylvania, Croatia, Slavonia, Galicia, Dalmatia. So it includes Croatia. It's not a directory of Croatia. It's a directory with a larger scope. And what I like for you to keep in mind when you're searching is when you get results from these multinational directories, don't ignore them because they don't say Croatia or or the name of a town. They are a larger geographic area that includes the place you're interested in. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. I will also mention, in light of what's going on in Israel, that there are some Israeli directories on the site. Most of these um, are online thanks to cooperation with Israeli genealogical societies. They are in Hebrew and English, and sometimes the two sections are not identical. There are even places that are only in one section or the other for whatever reason. And you can search them on the site. There are many more directories that uh, I would like to put online from Israel. And the IGRA has provided scans of some of those. I haven't put them online yet. I have some technical issues, but hopefully we'll get those online. And I think for researching people, you find in pages of testimony uh, where you have the submitter's name, maybe a relative of the Holocaust victim, and you want to contact that relative, and the page was submitted in 1985. How do I contact that person? Well, the submitter also has put his address on that form. These directories can be quite helpful. Um, and particularly this 1965 directory. Many times I've been able to track down submitters or relatives of submitters by using the 1965 Israel telephone directory. So there's some legal restrictions on putting much more recent directories online. I think right now we could go another 10 years to 75, so maybe I'll do that. But this is worth keeping in mind if you're doing a page of testimony related research. Okay. Also, in the collections menu, you can see a list of all the 364 Yisker books uh, arranged geographically that are currently searchable on the site. And I'll just mention that sometimes the same town appears twice. I've put the year of publication in parentheses because there's often more than one Yisker book published for the same place. So unfortunately, I can't discuss all the 3,500 directories with you, but we can go over some of the recent highlights. So if you haven't been using the site lately in the past, let's say 2 years or so, here's what's new. And I used to email people on my mailing list, which you can sign up to for free. I used to email whenever I would add directories, and often that was weekly. Since COVID, though, and in particular since the war in Ukraine, I've had to spend time on other things. So, although I've continued to add content, I have not been emailing the list very frequently lately. Um, I hope to resume soon with that. But here are some of the recent highlights. If you're interested in Galicia or any other places that were in the Austrian part of Austria-Hungary, then you will definitely want to see a look in the Austrian Central Cadastre from 1903, if you haven't already done so. So that covers all of what was then Austria, every little village and small occupations, um, and it's a couple thousand pages. And comparing it with other Galician directories from around the same time, it seems to be more comprehensive and to give a more detailed description of occupation. So I have a friend in the genealogy world whose family were klezmer musicians from a small village. And although they're not mentioned as explicitly as musicians in other Galician directories, they are in this one. So I highly recommend if you haven't searched lately and you're interested in the Austrian part of Austria-Hungary, that you search and hopefully you'll get a match here. There is also a 1908 edition that is online, but only part of it is online and not the Galician part, unfortunately. Okay, so take a look at this screen, other recent highlights. I'll just skip to the bottom and mention USHMM Finding Aid. So that's the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum here in Washington, D.C., and that publishes many of its finding aids for its collections online. And sometimes you'll find these in Google. You're searching for a name and there'll be a link to it, or you can search them on their website. But I've started adding them as well to Genealogy Indexer, just so in one place you can find all this content. So if you get matches there, then you'll want to follow up with the Holocaust Museum to see the actual microfilm or files. Here are some more of the recent highlights, and two people mentioned Łódź in Poland, and you can see that I recently added 1938 business directory for Łódź, which also includes another place, and 1947 and 48/49 directories, which is quite interesting. And actually, I've made a lot of use of those post-war directories for Łódź. I will touch on that again towards the end of the talk. But be aware, because for quite a long time, we didn't have any Łódź specific directories, just like directories for all of Poland. Um, there are a couple of important additions for Ukraine. And for obvious reasons, I've been prioritizing Ukraine lately and trying to get more content online, and will continue to do so. These include quite late, from the 1970s, 1990s, Ukrainian directories from Miriam Weiner, who was traveling to Ukraine and Belarus um, in the early 90s, starting in the early 90s, and acquired these physical directories. And those can be quite useful if you're researching relatives who were caught behind the Iron Curtain and were still there at that time. Okay. And maybe the families may have become disconnected. So what do these directories actually look like? Well, as I said earlier, there's a wide variety of contents. They're a little quirky. They are all a little different. So there's not one image of what does a telephone directory or business directory look like. Many different ways they're organized, different types of information. So we're going to look at a couple of them. And the one of the points that I hope you'll take away from this is that they're organized in many different ways. and it'd be very impractical to search them manually. You'd need a website like mine that allows you to search through all of them using the computer. You're not going to go into a library and pull off one of these directories and find your family. And this first one is a perfect example of that. This is about half of a page from a 1,000-page directory of Polish industry. So industry means kind of bigger businesses. And you can see in the top left, I've highlighted the section of this directory. The first level of organization is the type of business, the type of industry. It's export and import. So let's say I wanted to find all of the Kleinwaxes in Poland at this time. I would like to turn to the K section, but there is no K section. I need to know first that they're in the export and import business, then I can search for them. And otherwise, I'm out of luck. And even if I knew they were in the export import business, there's still no K section. It's organized by town after that. So I have to now know exactly what town I'm looking for, or else I have to go through every single page. And even within the town, you see I've highlighted here, you'd think, oh, it's alphabetical now. Not quite. Here we have a business with two proprietors. It's only alphabetized under the first guy's name. So really, the organization is very unfriendly to searching. And if you just want to cast a wide net and find everyone with a particular surname, you're out of luck. And that's actually why I started the site many years ago when somebody posted on, I don't remember whether it was the Jewish Gen discussion group or the Get Your Galicia group. I think it was Jewish Gen, but somebody posted that there was a directory online from Poland. And I thought, everybody is going to now go online and they're going to thumb through every single page. And that's not very efficient. And we're going to waste a lot of time. So that's why I originally created a search engine for this. But anyway, back to the slide here. If you look in the bottom right, there's another common feature here. I've highlighted, it's not a person's name, it's a business name, Polomex, which is a reasonable, not very creative name for a Polish import-export business. But you will find business names. And if you happen to know the name of a business of one of your relatives, you could search for that name. So that's an example of something you could search for other than a surname. But also, if you find the name of a business at an address that you know is associated with your relative, you might want to make a note of that and then search for it. This is another directory from Poland from the 20s, which is organized in a completely different way. It doesn't start with the business, it starts with the town. Okay? So again, there's no K section. I have to first know what towns I'm interested in, and I have no chance of finding people who were in towns where I didn't know any relatives lived. So that's why we need to be able to search the whole thing. This directory, by the way, although it's Polish, is half in French. Right? So there's an introduction at the beginning about the town, how many people live there, where the nearest train station is, do they have a post office, all that kind of stuff. And it's also repeated in French, and the occupations are both in Polish and French, which was language of international business at the time. So I think the audience here for these was not purely domestic. You're doing international trade, you want to look up business partners, maybe this is one of the uses of the directory. Anyway, you can see I've highlighted here the name of a pharmacist. Okay, so we have the different businesses, and under the pharmacies, there's a Chapu. Okay. Now, what I want you to pay attention to is right before the name, there is a symbol. It looks like the letter X. It's not actually the letter X, it's a symbol. Does anybody in the chat, anybody have a guess as to what that symbol might mean? No ideas. Okay. So it means that this business, this pharmacy, is registered in some official way. There's a precise legal definition to it. But what's important to know is that the registered businesses in Poland might have other records associated with them, other documentation. That could be in an archive or in a separate directory just of the registered businesses or Polish joint stock companies or what have you. And often there's a lot more information available about those businesses. So in general, whether it's Poland or Germany, as you'll see later, or other countries, when there are symbols in the directories, you don't want to ignore them. They often have a meaning that could be helpful to us genealogists. But what is that meaning? It's not written on this page. And sometimes at the beginning of the section or the first couple of pages of the directory, there will be a legend explaining the symbols. Not always. So maybe those pages don't survive or weren't scanned, or maybe there just was no legend printed. Maybe it was understood. Everybody knew at the time what that meant. I don't know. But if you can't figure out what a symbol means, you can write to me and I will try to help you if I know. I might not know. But it's often very useful uh, to investigate these symbols. And here below that is another example of a two proprietor business that isn't fully alphabetized. So that's a common feature. This is from Hungary, and I don't know how many of you are interested in Hungary, but for many years there were almost no directories online from Hungary. And then maybe 10 years ago, I was able to put this directory online, which I actually acquired from a Hungarian antiquarian bookseller. And it's a directory that covers a wide range of industries throughout all of Hungary. I don't remember the exact years, 30s or 40s. So it's a good date for us. And it's organized in a completely different way. So this is organized first by the type of business or industry, in this case, textiles. And then it's not organized by the town next. It's just organized by the name of the business, the actual name of the business, not the name of the proprietor, that business name. So you have no chance of finding your relatives here unless you happen to know the business name. And the name of the relative might be buried in this big. So there's a big block of text here, all about this business. Uh, where do they have offices? How much capital do they have? Who were the directors? Who's the vice president of the business? Maybe your relative. All this information about exactly what they're making. So it's very useful, but you have no chance of manually browsing through this directory and finding anybody. So that's why we need it to be searchable. Now this looks quite different. Okay, so this does not look like a business directory, telephone directory. And it's not even a residential directory listing all the people by street address who lived at a given street address. This is a directory of homeowners. Homeowners. Now, these do not exist, to my knowledge, for every town, but for some places they do exist, like Warsaw, and this one's from Krakow and Vienna, and well, there's another one that I won't say now. I don't want to spoil the the Q&A there, but there are other places as well for which there are homeowner directories. Those are incredibly useful for research. And why is that? Why would a homeowner directory be more valuable than, say, a list of residents or a business directory? Well, when you have multiple people who own the same property, as in this case, there's this huge block of names here. All of these people were co-owners of this one property. What's the relationship between them? Are they just random strangers who happen to own the same building somehow? They each own an eighth of this building? No. They might have been business partners, but very often they're relatives. And you can see this explicitly in this entry where we have many people with the same surname. Okay. All these people at the beginning have the same surname. And later on, we have some women listed as co-owners with married name and maiden name. Okay. And the maiden name of this woman is the same as the surname of these people at the beginning. And if you look further, we have people explicitly identified as being married or as being minors. So what's going on here? Well, these people are probably related. You almost have a family tree here. Maybe they all, as a family, decided, let's get into the real estate business, or maybe they inherited this property. Maybe there was their grandfather who originally owned it, and then these are all of the descendants, okay, who have inherited this property. And so this is a very big clue for research that these people might be related. And if you were researching one of them, maybe you should look for the others. And maybe you've struck out and you haven't found information about one of them, but one of these other people who could be a sibling or a cousin, you're able to find something about. Okay? So this is very important. These exist for Krakow for many years. I think from the 1870s to right before World War I. They're called Krakow address calendars because the actual Krakow calendars, excuse me, they actually have calendars in these for different religions. But for us, the homeowner section is the most interesting. Now, a little quiz here. Does anyone have a guess as to what these three numbers might mean? You see, I've highlighted not just the block of names, but there are three numbers here. Any ideas in the chat about those three numbers? This is a homeowners directory. No. Okay, well, right before the block of names, we have a street, actually an intersection of two streets. So if you want to identify a home that somebody owns, there's got to be a number attached to it. Okay. So you're walking down the street, you look at the building, there's a number on the side. That's one of these three. Now, in Krakow, as in many other towns, the buildings were renumbered periodically for various reasons. And let's say number 22 in 1912 uh, may not be the same building as number 22 in 1880. Okay, and you may not have thought of that when you're looking at either a directory or a birth record or marriage record that which often lists a um, a house number or some other number identifying a building. That depending on what year that piece of information is from, the same number may refer to a different building. And that happened in Krakow. And so what they've done in this directory, this was published shortly after one of the renumberings. And the second number here is the number of the same building in the previous numbering scheme. So this is very valuable if you have earlier records. It can help you to correlate them with later records, and you realize that the same building is mentioned in one birth record and another birth record. So probably these people are related. The house numbers or street addresses are a very useful tool in genealogy for uh, a very useful clue that people might be closely related, and sometimes a useful tool to disambiguate if there are multiple people with the same name, as often happens. Okay. So that's two of the addresses and numbers. And I should say, in general, you might wonder, well, how do I know if for my town there was a renumbering? In general, I don't know. I don't know the answer. For a couple of towns, there are publications that list multiple numbers, or I know for Lviv, in Ukraine today, in Galicia formerly. For Lviv, there was a book just about that. Uh, the whole renumbering scheme, which changed dramatically, not just the building numbers, but the district numbers. It all changed. They published a book about that. But in general, I don't know how you research it. And it becomes quite an issue when you're looking at very old records or old maps. And that's one of the ways you can be sure that a building is the same when you look at old maps and you're looking at the actual outline of the building, and you can see that it's the same, but oh, it has a different number in one year versus another. Okay.
Recording in
So
progress.
that's someone is not muted, maybe Janet. Okay. So that's two of the numbers. The third number is a little more uncommon, and that's the mortgage number. Okay. So this is a thing in Poland, and the mortgage number was not associated exactly with the building, but it was associated with the property, the parcel of land. And why that's important is that although the buildings may have been renumbered, usually the mortgage number was conserved over many, many years. Sometimes the plot of land was subdivided, and so you might get a 1649 A, B, C, but very often that mortgage number is retained throughout the years. And also, there are additional documents offline in archives in Warsaw related to these mortgages, but that's another topic. This is from a Polish directory, medical directory of doctors, dentists, nurses, midwives, veterinarians, anyone medical adjacent from Poland. And there are a couple of these on the site from the 30s, I think maybe the late 20s. So if you have any relatives in what was then Poland, you definitely want to search these. Here's an example of the type of information you can find. And like the homeowner directory we just saw, you can get women's maiden names. So here we have a laryngologist, and we have both her married and maiden name. Okay? And also, a woman is listed because that's not always the case in business directories, but they were women doctors and they were listed here. There are two numbers, 1897, 1922, after this woman's name. Does anybody in the chat have a guess as to what those numbers mean? Now, this is a little easier, so I'm sure someone can figure it out. Dates. Yes, they are dates.
Practice between the two dates.
So 1897. Okay, Rodney got it. All right. So the first year is the year of birth, and the second is the year of graduation. When did she get her medical degree? I want to go to a doctor. Do I want someone who just started practicing or someone with a little more experience? So you have that information. Now, unfortunately, what we don't have here is where she got her medical degree from. Okay. But there are only so many medical schools. And in Poland today, you might start in the same town. Now, maybe she didn't go to school where she was practicing. That's not a given. But start there, look in Warsaw, look in big cities. And you can write to the medical schools and say, hey, my relative, this was her name, and she got her degree in 1922. Was she a student there? Or maybe you have some other information to know where she was living at that time in 1922. Maybe you know, because they retain the records of the students, and you can get a student's file with a photo, some who her parents were, her grades, and maybe a thesis, a dissertation, something, depending on the school. I know a few people have done this, and it's very interesting to get that personal information. Um, yeah, and Rodney said WorldCat sometimes has these theses. That's true. Okay, this is a completely different type of directory. As I mentioned, there are many kinds. This is a directory of bank accounts at the Polish bank PKO. And there are a couple of these from the 30s that are on the site. So these are the actual account numbers and the account holders. And PKO still exists today. It's been nationalized and privatized a couple of times, but the bank still exists. And here are the people who own, account 505,854. So if you look carefully here, you'll see that the first two people listed, besides having confusingly similar bank account numbers, 505,854 and 505,584, so you can just imagine how much money went to the wrong account. They have the same name also, the same surname and the same given name. And also they lived in the same town, Kolomea, in today in Ukraine. So, it's important when you're sending money to send it to the right person. And I guess that's why they've included the father's name in the bank account. It actually says son of Fievel. So we have the names of the fathers to disambiguate between these two people. And there's another example right below it. Okay, so that's a surprise, and that might be very valuable information to you. And I also want to point out at the bottom here that there's a woman listed. So although we often don't have women in the business directories, in these directories of bank accounts, which unfortunately I only have for Poland, and only for PKO, which although it was a very large bank, we have women listed. And interestingly, if you search for the Polish word for rabbi, you will also find many accounts explicitly listed as being for Rabbi so-and-so. I don't know whether those were personal accounts or those were communal accounts or what, but this is more information that you can find directly. Right now, this one obviously looks very different. It's a totally different font, and you may guess that this has to be from Germany or some German-speaking territory. And there are, I think, over 1,000 directories on the site from Germany or the German world. They have some common features, which are shown on this page. So besides the font, this one happens to be from Danzig, which is a place I'm especially interested in, and Rodney is as well. And the German directories tend to be organized into 2 or 3 sections, one by business, one by street address. That's what we're looking at here. And the third by, if it's there, the list of all the residents. So just by the names of the residents. And those two or three sections can have different information. So about the same person, there might be more or less detail in one section versus another. So you want to look in them all. I've also highlighted a couple of things here that are are in common with the other German directories. So if we look in the middle, this fellow here happens to be one of my relatives. Unfortunately, in this directory, only the surname is listed, not even a first initial, although that's less common. But here he is. I know exactly who this person is, even without the given name, because he's a very unusual occupation. He was a master plumber. And this guy, in addition to dealing with sewage, he also was responsible for electrifying the great synagogue of Danzig. So he was an important fellow, and genealogically, very important too, because he was married a couple of times and had like 20 some odd children. So he appears prominently in my family tree. But what I want to draw your attention to is the symbol after his name. And I mentioned symbols are important. You don't want to ignore it. Okay. So does anybody in the chat have a guess about the symbol? And before you guess, look at the rest of this page because the symbol appears elsewhere too, and that's a clue. No one? Okay. So I'll give a second clue for those of you who know some German. In many of the German directories, instead of this symbol, the capital letter E appears. No ideas? Okay. So this indicates the homeowner. And that's why we see the symbol many times and only once per address, and it's always the first person. So this guy was the owner of this property, on this street and this a number on the building. Okay. So I mentioned earlier we have homeowners for a couple of places in Poland and Vienna. Also, although they aren't called homeowner directories, many of the German directories indicate in this section of organized by street address, they indicate who owned the building, which is quite useful genealogically because of the connection between typically homeowners and inheritance of ownership. Okay. And people moved around a lot, but the homeowner usually didn't change quite as frequently. Okay, let's look on the bottom left, and there's another symbol, an asterisk. So this is very similar. This is also a homeowner, but you'll notice below there is a street address. So this is someone who owned the building, but he lives somewhere else. So they're telling you where did he live. So I guess if, the pipe's busted and you need to call the superintendent, you know where to go. He was living somewhere else. Okay, and the third feature that is shared in common with a lot of German directories is on the right here. So this is a woman. I know that, even though there isn't a given name listed, because instead of her occupation, there's the German word for widow. And this is very common in German directories that we have widow explicitly written in business directory or in the listing by street. Why is this so important? Why have I highlighted this? So for Danzig and for many other German towns, we have directories for not just 1 year, 2 years. There could be 100 years of directories. It goes back many, many, many years, year after year. So you can look, let's say this was 1912. Well, let's look in 1911, 1910, 1909, until we don't see this widow. Maybe we see someone with the same surname, a man. Who is he? Or might he have been her husband? Not necessarily. Could have been a brother, father, somebody else. Maybe she inherited the property. But there's a chance this person was the husband. And moreover, when you see his name appear, that might give you an indication of when he died, right? If she's a widow the next year, that might help you quite a bit. So this is an important clue. It may seem like, well, am I really going to, that can I really benefit my research? I can tell you it's helped me, okay, tracking people down. So this is worth keeping in mind about the German directories. Now, this is a page from one of these Russian Empire directories. It covers all the Russian Empire. Excuse me, this directory does not. It's from a series that covers all the Russian Empire. This particular directory is from one of the gubernias that's today in Belarus. And obviously, it's in Russian. As you're going to see, you don't need to know any Russian to be able to find matches in these directories, as I will show you. What is important about the Russian language directories and why you should definitely not ignore them or be afraid of them if you don't know any Russian? I have highlighted a name here, and as you can see, it is 3 words. The first word is the given name of this person. The last name word is the surname. Does anybody know in the chat what is this name in the middle? What is this thing in the middle? You got a given name, a surname. No. Oh, patronymic. Okay, that is correct, Rodney and Yolanda. So we have the patronymic, we have the father's name. So these Russian language sources are very, very valuable for genealogy. And this series that I mentioned, this goes back, this started in the 1840s, the whole Russian Empire. So you can imagine someone, and this could be business owners. The series also includes members or prominent members of various organizations like the Firefighters Association or the Lawyers Guild or whatever. Um, so maybe this person was in his 60s and his 70s, and you've got his in 1840s, and you got his father's name there. That goes back a long time. So these can be very, very valuable for your research, and they cover a huge area. And some surprising places. Uh, at a conference many years ago in Orlando, Florida, the IAJGS started doing a mentoring session where people could go up to a table and they could ask somebody a question. Can you help me with my research? And I was manning one of those tables, and someone said, "Can you help me with my research? I'm looking for my family from Tbilisi, Georgia." And I thought, oh my goodness, what am I going to find from Tbilisi, Georgia? There's not really a lot of Jewish genealogical resources online. Um, and I thought, well, we have all these Russian Empire directories, so let's search. And sure enough, in this very same series of directories, there was her relative, which she identified immediately from the name, from Tbilisi, Georgia. So, don't ignore these sources. Okay, so I've just shown you some examples inside directories, a few of the 3,500 plus directories, and they don't all look like that, but you can get an idea of the diversity of content and, excuse me, and also hopefully the fact that it'd be very difficult to search these manually. I've just showed you images, and you can't search images. Max was saying before we started that he's volunteers in some transcription projects, and Rodney does too, working with me. You look at an image and you type what you see into a spreadsheet, and then you send that spreadsheet off to JewishGen or somebody, and before you know it, it's searchable online. You go search in a database, and up comes the name because you submitted that spreadsheet. But that requires transcription. Somebody had to type what they saw in that image. And I've got 2 million pages of directories, 100 million names. I don't have time for that. And I don't have enough friends who are going to volunteer to do that. So how do we do it? I'm not Ancestry. I'm not a multi-billion dollar company that just hires people to do it. So I use software to do it. It's called optical character recognition software. And this is a computer program that basically looks at the image and tries to figure out what are the letters in the image. And it does the transcription. Okay. So that makes it possible for me to make 2 million pages searchable. However, just like people make mistakes, so does the computer. And so the OCR process that is not 100% accurate. And I'm going to show you some ways to get around those errors. So I'm now going to switch to the website and we'll do some demonstrations of searching. So you can see how this works. So as I said, the absolute simplest thing you can do is you just go to the search box and you type a name. Okay, and you press the search button. That's it. You just got 26 matches. Now, what happened, and this is live, what happened in that half a second is all 2 million pages of directories and all the Yisker books and everything else was searched. It's very fast. Okay. I did not change any of the default options. You see this any place. I did not say, oh, I'm only interested in Belarus. And why bother with that? If it's so fast, you can search everything. And as you can see on the side, we have this geographic breakdown. So if I wanted to drill down on this and say, oh, I'm only interested in Poland, I could just click on Poland and see those results. Yeah, so that's the simplest way to search. And you can see the matches highlighted. Like, let's see, let me just reorganize my window here. Here, there's a match in this 1935-36 directory. There's a link that would take me to an image. And I can see highlighted here the word I searched for, which is a surname, and next to it, Leon. That's maybe that I'm looking for Leon. So now I'm going to click on that link. Maybe I'm not looking for Leon, and I'm not going to click on that link. But you get a little of the context, okay? And let's say I scroll down. Okay, here's one from 1913 from Lviv. Wolf and an address. Okay, maybe I'm interested. Now, if you are interested, you should always click on the link because there could be errors here. Not just that the name is spelled wrong, but you might have the impression that two words next to each other here are next to each other on the page, but these directories can have multiple columns. They can be kind of have a complicated layout, so that might not always be true. So you always want to look at the image. So you could click and see it. And also down here it says about this source. So if you click on that, you'll see that the original title of the directory, in this case in Polish and German. And where are the images coming from? I don't have all these 2 million images on my server on a computer that I'm running this website on. These images come from the Silesian Digital Library in Poland. And when you click, you're going to be reaching out to the Silesian Digital Library and getting the image from them. And you can see I added this directory before 2010. This was actually the 13th directory I added. So it's very old, this one. Okay, so I could click, but I happen to know that this Polish website, especially on the weekends, is very slow. I don't know if they turn things off on the weekends or what. So I've opened this up ahead of time. And this is what that page, if you click the link, you'll go straight to this page. This directory has about 800 pages, and this is on page, on the 583rd page in the directory, which actually is numbered 581. And here's what it looks like. And I'm going to zoom in here and see a little better. Okay, so you can see there are names, and there are kind of groupings here, sections by occupation. So the guy we're looking for is at the bottom here, and there's no highlighting by default on this page. So you have to look at each of these sections and hope that things are roughly alphabetized, which, as we saw at the beginning, is not guaranteed. But usually it doesn't take too long. And here he is, and here's his occupation. So that's great. That gives me some information. Now, if I didn't see the occupation here, like let's say I was looking for this guy at the top, his occupation's on the previous page because the section extends over multiple pages. So sometimes you have to page back. But here we have the occupation. Let me see if can I zoom in even more? It should be very visible. Does anybody know what this occupation is? This guy. Polish and German. Okay. So he made gingerbread, which is pretty unusual. And if you encounter anybody in this family who made gingerbread, that's probably the guy or like his brother. And also, if you have any older relatives who might remember this family, you could ask them, do you know anybody who made gingerbread? And you'd be surprised when you give very specific information like that, that it might bring some memories back that otherwise you would not have heard. And someone say, oh, yeah, I had an uncle who brought cakes to us or whatever. So these occupations are very, very important, and especially the unusual ones. And that's how a simple search works. Okay, so that's something you can do. immediately, but there are other ways we can search. As I said, I did not restrict the place at all. But let's say okay, there were 26 hits, 24 were in Poland. There were two that were multinational. Remember, we talked about those multinational directories with a very broad geographic scope. So I wonder what those are. I'm just going to click on multinational. Okay, so the first match, it's all in Russian. This is a Russian Empire World War I casualty list. There's not a directory. This is from one of the military lists I mentioned. Well, how is it that I'm getting matches in Russian? I didn't type Russian. Maybe you don't know any Russian. Why are we getting matches in Russian? How did that happen? And as I said, all these Russian language sources have patronymics. Here, in this particular directory, although they don't list the full patronymic, the full name, they give an abbreviation that you can figure out, just common name. Well, below the search box, there are some options, some different ways you can control the search, and also a link that says more options. And this is some more advanced stuff, including transliteration. And by default, transliteration into Cyrillic, which really means into Russian, Ukrainian, Bulgarian, that's included. So if you do nothing, you don't change the default options. When you type in Latin letters, you're automatically searching all those Russian language sources is in Russian as well, and Ukrainian language sources in Ukrainian, and so on. Okay. Now, if you wanted to type in Russian, you could. You could press that little button, you can type, and you can search specifically in that language. You also see Hebrew as a transliteration option. Okay. Hebrew alphabet. So we're talking about Hebrew language and Yiddish. And this is not on by default. The reason for that is more than half of the people using the site are not Jewish genealogists. Although I've only ever spoken, except once, about this website to Jewish genealogy groups. More than half of the users are not Jewish. There are a lot of users in Poland because there's very heavy Polish coverage, and in Hungary because there aren't that many Hungarian directories online, as I've mentioned. And those results are not very relevant to them. But you can manually say, oh, I want to see transliterations into Hebrew letters. So let's take a look at what that looks like. Let me go back to all places, and let me type in my own name. Okay. So here you go. And we're getting matches in a Yizkor book, Rohatyn Yizkor book. This is where the Kleinwax family is from, Rohatyn. And you can see here is the name. You don't have to know Hebrew. You don't have to know Yiddish. Interestingly, you'll find in the Yizkor books, even on the same page. So this is image 225. You can see two different spellings of the name on the same page. One vav and two vavs. Okay, and that is pretty common. And you might find some rather strange spellings because the Yizkor books were not assembled professionally for the most part. They were survivors, and they wanted to tell the story of their town, and they put these things together, as amateurs in the publishing industry. So there are mistakes. You can find some unusual spellings, and this transliteration for Hebrew. It casts a pretty wide net to look for variants that might actually appear in the Yizkor books and in the other sources like the Israeli directories. Okay, so you can search all those. And I should mention, I know many of you are familiar with the Yizkor book project on JewishGen, which, by the way, I should note today, especially that is run by an Israeli, Lance Ackerfeld, who's been directly impacted by October 7th and what's gone the safety situation since then. He's had to move because of that. And he's still, and his team are still putting out Yizkor book translations on JewishGen on a regular basis, which is wonderful. So if you go on JewishGen, you'll find a lot of Yizkor books translated to English, so you can read what they say. But that's different than what I've done here. There's no English translation first, but also you can search the original languages. So maybe the translator of the Yuska book translated the name in a way that you wouldn't find by searching. But if you search the original, language, you might find it in Hebrew or Yiddish. Also, there are many Yizkor books that are searchable that have not yet been translated, so they're not on JewishGen in that project. So these are complementary, and if you're interested in Yizkor books, you should search them in both places. Okay, so that is transliteration. Now, there are a couple other ways that you can search. I don't have time to go through them all, but let me just demonstrate one. Actually, let me go back, Kleinwax. I'm sure you're all familiar with Soundex searching. Okay, Soundex is when you want to find different spellings that sound the same or might have sounded the same. So that's very common on JewishGen or GRI Poland or Geshe Galicia or Ancestry. And we can do that here too. I just select Soundex, press search, and now I'm going to find Kleinwax with a KS and Kleinwax with a CHS. Okay. And if you scroll down, eventually you get some very strange words that are technically Soundex matches. And if you've ever used Soundex searches on those other sites I've mentioned, sometimes you get garbage. And that's because the Soundex, the definition of what a Soundex match is very liberal. And what I've done is to sort in such a way that the bad results are at the bottom. So if you do a Soundex search, just start scrolling down until you get nonsense. And there were a lot of matches here, but not all of them good. Okay. So I want to skip ahead a little bit because I know I've said a lot already, and I still have some things to say. The third option here called OCR adjusted search, okay, because this is not something that you find elsewhere and you may not be familiar with. This is unique to my website, and it's a very important tool for getting around the errors that computerized transcription may introduce. So to learn about the other things here, which I don't have time to explain, like searching for the new matches, what's been added recently, you can click on the guide link and that explains everything else. But for now, let me skip ahead and focus on the OCR adjusted search. So what is this? It's a little hard to explain, but very easy to demonstrate visually. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go up to the top. There's a link to the forum, which is kind of like a bulletin board where people can post questions and sometimes I answer if I have time. It's not that active, probably because I don't answer a lot. So people stop posting. But I want to show you a real question. This is not, I didn't plant this. This is a real question somebody asked way back in 2010. And I'm going to enlarge it so you can read this. Okay. Looking for the Share family in Brody, Brody in Galicia. I can find no reference to the name Share, in particular Saul David, who lived and died in Brody. He was a milliner or a hat maker. Okay, so he's given me all the details that you would expect to find in a directory, the full name, the place, and occupation. Okay, he didn't tell me when he lived in Brody. Okay, I have no idea. Was this 1820 or 1920? But that's the name. He says, I've tried all the better known sites, LDS and JRI, and I guess at the time, 2010, and probably still today, Genealogy Indexer was not considered to be one of the better known sites. But in none of them can I find a reference to the Share family. So I thought when I read this, I'll show them. I may not be a better known site, but I'll bet I have information about this guy's family because these directories, as I said, are often not on the other sites. So now I'm going to show you what I did. How do I search for Share from Brody? You might like to choose the place, Brody. But if I scroll down to Galicia, okay, there's an option to search all of Galicia, but there's no Brody option. Okay, Brody was a pretty big place, but for whatever reason, I have not found any Brody specific directories. Now, Brody would be included in the all Poland directories or in the all Galicia directories. So I could just search there, but the surname Share is pretty common. So I'm going to get a lot of other people. So what did I do? Share and space Brody. I'm putting both words in. Now, what that does is it's going to search for any page of any directory or other source on which both words appear. Okay? Not necessarily in relationship to each other or in proximity to each other. So it's not exactly the type of search we want, but they're both on the page. There is a way to do proximity search. You can read about that in the guide. So I click search, and the first match is from Budapest. So this is definitely wrong. We're in completely the wrong place. And you can see the word Brody here is actually somebody's surname, which happens to be on the same page as Share. So this is completely wrong. And if I scroll down, or let's say I just click on Galicia to limit the search, I also won't find any match to Saul David Share. So then what I did after striking out with this regular match, well, let's restrict it to Poland for now. So you can see Poland, if you do the regular search, is 29 matches. But then I did the OCR adjusted search. So I just changed that to OCR adjusted. Click search, and all of a sudden there are 40 matches. So there's some new matches. And at first they look very similar. It's not obvious what has happened. Okay, there's a match from Polish bank accounts. Share and Brody on the same page. That would have been found by the regular search, the default search. Only when we scroll down quite a ways, see if I can find it, do we find Saul David. Okay, that's the guy's name. Now, what's unusual here is instead of Scheer, the result I'm getting says Schcer, Shkur, which is it sounds like nonsense. So is this our Saul David, the hat maker, and Brody, Saul David Share, or is this something else? What's going on here? So we're going to take a look at this match in the 1913 Galicia business directory. And again, I preloaded this just to save time. Okay, I'm going to zoom in quite a bit. Let me zoom in a lot here. Make sure that you can see in detail exactly what is happening. Okay. So Brody, first of all, we're in the Brody section, which is good. S, C, H. What is this letter? So OCR, the software that transcribes, the software that looks at this image and tries to figure out the letters in it, it sees this first letter E that has been printed very lightly, or the ink's worn off the page in the last 100+ years, or it wasn't scanned well. It sees this and says, ah, that's a C. That's the letter C. It doesn't realize no, that's not a C. That's an E, because otherwise it doesn't make any sense. It's not a name. So a human transcriber would immediately realize that Share, but the software got it wrong. It said Schcer. And legitimately, there is no horizontal part to the E, so you could see how it could do that. But this is our guy. He's a Saul David in Brody. And if we scroll to the top, you got to scroll back to see the section. We are in this is Polish for men's hats. So this is the exact guy. We found him. He wasn't in the better known sites, but he's on Genealogy Indexer. But we only found him because we used this OCR adjusted method that understood that, the letter C and the letter E, they can be mistaken for each other because of that lightly printed E. And that's basically what that OCR adjusted method does. It looks for letters that could be mistaken by the software when it does the transcription. And it's very, very helpful. Now, that's just one of 3 methods for finding words despite those mistakes. And the second one has been in the chat. Somebody has guessed what it would be. Does Genealogy Indexer support wildcard searching? Why, yes, it does. And wildcards are very helpful here. If you have a long name like mine, Kleinwax, the more letters you have, the more opportunities there are for a mistake. So how about I just delete the last couple of letters and put an asterisk? And that's a wildcard. It says find anything that starts Kleinw. So there's less risk of a mistake uh, causing the word not to be found. So there's my name. Okay, and here's a different name. There's a different family, but it starts Kleinw. So yes, wildcard searching is supported. You can find more details by clicking on Guide. And that is the second way to get around OCR errors. Now, the third way is over here where it says Browse Words. So browse has a different meaning than search. And the mental model that you should have here, or the imagery, I hope that in Australia, your libraries, sort of pre-internet libraries were set up like ours in this way. When I used to walk into a library, there would be a big uh, chest, a big wooden chest with hundreds of drawers. And in each of those drawers, it was called a card catalog, there were many pieces of paper, cards, and each one had a subject on it. And they were arranged alphabetically. So if I wanted to research Poland, I'd open up the drawer with a P on it, okay, or a PO on it, and I'd thumb through the cards until I got to Poland, and it would tell me where are the books related to Poland. Okay? And that's the idea you should have here. There's this huge card catalog. You're in a library, and there are all these cards, and each one has a name on it, or really a word that appears in one of these 2 million pages of directories and all the other content. So let's say I'm looking for the surname Rotenstein. I'm going to now browse that card log. I'm going to pull out the drawer that begins RO, and I'm going to look at the cards around Rotenstein, and I'm going to see what cards are there nearby. Okay, so here's Rotenstein, and here's Rotensteinus. I guess maybe that's like a Latvian or Lithuanian branch of the family, and Rotensteinu, and whatever alphabetically appears nearby. And sometimes you can find the OCRs this way because they only affect one letter. And so alphabetically, it'll be nearby. Um, Sometimes you can also find words like this one here, where the last E in Rotenstein has been replaced by a B, B as in boy. And you can imagine that if the letter E were printed very heavily, very dark ink, that, it'd be like a blob of ink that turns it into a B. And so the OCR software thought that was a B. And if I click on that, it will search, and here's the match. Okay. So this is really, if you look at the image, Rotenstein, but it was very heavily printed E. So the OCR software thought it was a B. But I would not have found that with the OCR adjusted search because that is surprisingly an uncommon error. So that's not included in OCR adjusted search. That only accounts for the common mistakes. So this is another way to search for words despite those mistakes. Okay, so I'm going to go back now to the slides. And as I said at the beginning, you can search for any kind of text, not just surnames. And most useful thing to look for is street addresses. Maybe from some other source, some census record or a birth record or a postcard, a letter that somebody sent, some other source, somebody's street address. You might want to search by that street address and find everybody in many different years who's living at the same address. They may have been relatives. Or you want to find neighbors, particularly if you're interested in a much later, right before the war. Who were the neighbors? And maybe I could find the descendants of that family today and ask them, do you know what happened to this person? It sounds like there's no chance of success, but actually I've had success with that. Okay. So searching by street address is very powerful. I'm going to give a very concrete example of that. This is from a different website, not mine, called missing-identity.net. Unfortunately, it's currently offline. I don't know why. So I'm looking at an archived version of it. And this was a project to find the identities of child Holocaust survivors. Maybe they don't know their parents' names. Help them through genealogy. And we're going to look at one of these cases, this little boy here. Okay, I'm going to zoom in. Marius Leffler. Okay, here he is later in life. And I will just read quickly, and we're almost at the end of the presentation. I will read quickly Marius' story, and you will see why searching by street address is so powerful. So Marius was adopted, and he was living in Warsaw. And he said, and at the time, of course, he did not know he was adopted. He said the strangest result of uh, unseen relationship happened shortly before the ghetto in Warsaw started. A young Jewish family, at the time he didn't know he was Jewish, a young Jewish family moved to the apartment next to my Leffler family, that was his adopted family, at Krasinskiego 29, apartment 7, in a particular suburb of Warsaw. So all these years later, he knew the street address where he was living in Warsaw when the ghetto started. This couple had a son about 2 or 3 years younger than me. There was a strong connection between our families. The Jewish neighbor visited our home often with her son, looking at me with very loving eyes. I enjoyed playing with the son. After a few weeks, the Jewish family had to move into the ghetto, but we still kept in contact with them for some time through the telephone. They had a telephone. Then the telephone went silent. Much later, my adoptive parents told me that that woman was my biological mother, and the little boy was my half-brother. Okay, so Marius, as an adult, knows that his biological mother, whose name he does not know, lived next door to him. And he lived at Krasinskiego 29 in Warsaw. We'd like to find the mother's name. So let's search for everybody who lived at Krasinskiego 29. Because next door, in this case, means apartment next door in a big apartment building. There are a lot of matches. Okay, this one's from 1966. That's too late. So let me restrict the date. 1940, Warsaw Telephone Directory. Krasinski 29. Okay. And we don't have to scroll down too far. We see Leffler. These are his adoptive parents. This is his house, his apartment where he grew up. And somewhere in this list is his mother, biological mother. So the idea was, Marius, could you look at this? Maybe a name will jump out at you. Or let's now research each of these people and find out, were any of them Jewish? And, maybe there's some clue and we can find out this is your family. This is a very powerful tool. Unfortunately, when this 1940 Warsaw telephone directory became available, Marius had passed away. So he was not able to use this. But for other people, it's a very, very powerful tool. And I think I don't have time to mention it, but I'll just briefly say that this is extremely useful for restitution research in Warsaw as well, which I helped out with a number of years ago. So I won't go into details about that. And we'll go to the Q&A. If anyone is interested in that, Warsaw restitution, email me, Logan@genealogyindexer.org. I'll put it in the chat. And I will be glad to take any questions now.
I think we can take about 3 questions, time considering.
Okay, so in my search, I'm looking at Belinda's question. In my search for so-and-so, I have been directed to the 1935-36 directory, Lviv, Stanislavov, and Tarnopol. A color picture has been loaded, but I can't find information about them. What do I do, please? Okay, so probably they're on that page, and you're just not seeing them. But there's a chance that they're on the previous page and there was a mistake, but usually they're on the page. You just have to search harder. So send me an email. I just posted my email address, logan@genealogyindexer.org, and send me the exact link or the image number of that directory that is relevant, or maybe you put it there, 722. I don't remember if that's the image number or the number of the directory, but send me the details and I will either find it on that image or find it on the correct one.
If anyone wants to unmute themselves and ask Logan a question.
Okay, any other questions?
Just keep in mind, this has been recorded and you'll be able to review this on our website. In due
Yeah, so for anyone who's watching this later, not live,
Yeah,
if you have questions, email me.
right. Okay. Thanks, Logan. Rini,
Wow, Logan, that's amazing. You've opened my eyes to so many new features of this website. I haven't used your website for quite a few years and realize I've been in error of not using it. And thank you very much. We much appreciate your time. You're very specific and very clear in your presentation. We look forward to speaking to you and in the future if we ever need some more help. Thank you very much.
Right. And if you have some Australian directories that you'd like to be made searchable, if that's relevant, let me know. Um, and we'll see if we can put them online.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the things that I think I never can pick up in Australia is the rate books. I don't know whether you can find the rate books, which is the homeowners books.
So I was not familiar with that term. I'm glad you explained it. Couple of options. If the images are online somewhere, let me know. If they're not online, if they're offline, are they somewhere that has a digitization program where you can pay them to digitize, or where you have a friend who works there and they'll do it for you, or where you can walk in and use a scanner? I don't know. Are they printed? Are they on microfilm? I mean, we can explore what is involved.
We'll have
But
to
if the images are already online somewhere, then that would be great. But if not, if they're a useful resource, we can certainly look into it. I don't know how extensive they are. If it's something where, manual transcription is not practical, so you want to use OCR, something like this, or also I should say that OCR is only applicable if it's typewritten. So if these things are handwritten, forget it.
yeah.
Now, there are other tools for computerized transcription of handwritten sources that work to varying degrees. So this gets into what's called handwriting recognition, and there's a company called Transcribus. I'll put that in the chat. And they have software for this. There are various AI-based approaches that work sometimes well, sometimes horribly. It really depends on the handwriting. And the other key thing is it like one person, one employee who wrote 10,000 pages and it's all in one person's handwriting? Or is every page in different handwriting? That makes a huge difference. So if you have a lot of pages in one person's handwriting, that in general, what you can do is train the software to recognize this one person's handwriting. So let's say you have 10,000 pages, you would manually transcribe 100 pages, and then it learns that person's handwriting, and it can churn out the other 9,900 pages with very high accuracy. That's sometimes possible if it's one person's handwriting. Like that happens with notary records sometimes. So I'm happy to discuss that more with you. That's a possibility.
Thank you.
And I see someone wrote in the chat that yes, they are handwritten. So that's an issue often. But yeah, I will say I've been experimenting quite a bit with the AI software that's come out now that has a lot of vision related capabilities, and it's getting pretty good in this area. So I'm not sure for how much longer the traditional OCR software that I use is going to be the best tool. I think in the near future we'll be using much more AI software to do this, and I've been starting to experiment with ways to use that in Genealogy Indexer and also in genealogy and other kinds of transcription projects and things other than transcription that are still useful. Like you have 200,000 records scanned online, and 2% of them are Jewish. How do we identify which
Yeah,
ones are Jewish?
exactly. It's very hard.
And so that's a task where AI might be able to help. That's different than transcription. We're not asking it to transcribe. We just want it to tell us which ones are Jewish based on the religion being listed in a certain place on the document or something else.
By the
So,
survey.
yeah, this is an area of active development. So even if it's not possible to do something with those handwritten records now, a year from now or a couple of years from now, maybe it will be.
Yeah, we'll look forward to that. Thank you, Logan. Once again,
Thanks
you've
very much.
been great.
And thank you all for interrupting, delaying your breakfast. And have a good Sunday. And of course, we wish all the best to everyone in Israel.
Amen.
Amen to that.
Thanks, Logan.
I'd
All right.
like to mention a couple of weird directories that I've found on Logan's site that have helped me in the past. One is the Shanghai Emigranten Address Book, which it lists about 10,000 German and Austrian refugees in Shanghai at the outbreak of the war. And there's a couple of B'nai B'rith directories from Poland, which list from the 1920s and 30s, which list members of B'nai B'rith and also deceased members of B'nai B'rith in Poland. And this is, I think, mostly in what used to be Prussian Poland, but I've found important stuff in those.
I'm so glad you mentioned that, Rodney. I put that Shanghai directory online so long ago, and it's probably never been more relevant than to the Australian Society. I can't believe I forgot to mention it, but it was not so easy to put it online because the images were not online. Okay, so those were provided actually by someone who had a physical copy. I saw you held one up, who many, many years ago, she gave me the copy to scan in, and with the permission of the company that owns the rights, the copyright,
Well,
provided that.
That's an interesting question because it has a long history. In fact, my father is part of the chain that led to this facsimile edition being published. And I believe that facsimile edition is no longer available. So if you don't happen to have a physical copy, as I have, then Genealogy Indexer is pretty much the only place to get it.
So, Rodney, maybe I don't know how much interest is in it, but that might be the type of thing that Jewish Gen Press might want to republish if they get the rights, make available and physically. Well, that's another topic.
Well, I guess the demand has probably diminished greatly since you put it online.
But yeah, so that's an example of I can't keep in my head all of these unique sources that hopefully you will find when you do the research. And another one that comes to mind is somebody who's researching her great-grandfather, I think, who was a painter in Poland before the war. And she's trying to find where are all of his paintings. Well, it turns out that there's some directory of like some Polish art society and that he was a member of, and they listed the titles of his paintings that were being exhibited here and there. And she's rediscovered all these paintings from this, source that probably nobody else has looked in. But that's the type of stuff that you can find if you're lucky. So I hope you all explore it.
Thanks very much, Logan.
Thank you all.
Right. Right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye.